with Mexico, how you went there, and just anything in
Okay.
general.
Okay. I was I was in World War II, and like a lot of people in that time, we were sort of pleased to go because we'd been attacked, and it was seemed an outrageous sort of attack. But the being in the service was, for me at any rate, it was sort of a safe haven. I spent most of my time in the Pacific on a destroyer, just sort of riding around in the Pacific. And I was in San Francisco when the announcement came that the war was over and celebrated along with everybody else out there in the streets. There was a lot of kissing. It was a great wonder that some big disease element didn't move through the country after that with all of the big kissing going on. But at any rate, at that time, being in the service meant that you had an education guaranteed. And you got 4 years of college or job training or whatever you wanted. Like many people, I had a little problem making up my mind. The main thing that I had going, I guess, for me was that I had been drawing and been an artist, uh, budding artist most of my life. So I went into school, an art school in Houston, essentially for commercial art. After about a year of that, a friend came in one day into class with a Life magazine, and the cover story showed a bunch of well, pre-hippies, but guys with beards sort of sitting around drinking from tall glasses, and the line on the cover was GI Paradise. Well, the GI Paradise was an art school in Mexico, San Miguel de Allende, which is right in the center of Mexico, and is really a revolutionary war town. It's the Mexicans regard it as sort of like we do our Lexington or something like that. Very important in their history. And the town has been preserved. It still looks like it's in the 1600s or something like that. And the main Americans down there were a few retired Americans and about 200 art students, um, some of whom were serious artists, some of whom went like I did for the lifestyle that was described in the Life magazine article. Um, Bottles of rum, 65 cents. That seemed very attractive when you were living in Houston. At any rate, I did go to art school there and worked with an artist named David Siqueiros, who was one of the three top muralists in Mexico and actually in the world at that time, and was totally won over by Mexico. I mean, I felt I was home from the day I got off the train and smelled that very distinctive kind of blend of charcoal smoke and tortillas cooking and listening to a language I couldn't understand. So I loved it. I was there maybe a month before I discovered that I was only 2 blocks away from a cantina, a bar called La Cucaracha. And the American artists were hanging out there just about every night, along with some, I guess what we'd call sort of hip Mexicans, uh, lawyers, young district attorney, people of that sort. And I sort of fell in with them. They spoke English, teaching me a little Spanish. And I discovered after about the third night that we were together that one of them was a bullfighter, was an attorney named David, what was his name? I can't remember now, Rivera. And found out that there was a bullfight that was going to occur that he was going to be in about 2.5 months. And one of the other guys at the table, younger guy, said, I'm going to be in that fight too. I'm going to be a banderiero. And I said, what's a banderiero? And he said, well, have you been to a bullfight? And I said, yes, I had seen maybe two at that time. And he says, a banderiero is the guy who puts the spears in bull's neck to change the way he hooks to make it safer for the bullfighter. So I said, "Oh, that sounds great. Could I do that?" And they all started laughing and said, you're an American. You haven't seen bullfights. You don't know much about it." And I said, "Well, I'm willing to learn." So here I was, only in this Mexican town. I spoke very little Spanish. Had been there only a month and a half or whatever it was at that time. So they said, "We'll get you some training." And just a few days later, the lawyer came by. The lawyer was what's called the torero. He was the head of the little group, the cuadrilla, that was going to fight a bull. And he brought a trainer for me, a guy named Silverio. And Silverio was a local guy who was very skillful at putting in the little hooked banderillas. So I trained probably 3 or 4 days a week at the bull ring in San Miguel, learning how to run backwards, which is very important, and keep your eye on the bull, learning the basic vocabulary of the bullfight and the various stages of the bullfight. And we had something that was like a bicycle wheel with a big hunk of cactus on the top and horns in the front. So it was like a fake bull that he would come running at me with, and I was to learn how to move to the side. I learned a little bit of cape work and learned how to put in these banderillas, the little spiked spears. People who heard that I was doing this, particularly the other Americans, said, "You're going to wind up getting very badly hurt. That is a dangerous sport, and it's not for Americans." But by then, I was committed. So the night before the first fight, I was in town and ran into some people from Mexico City, some young guys, probably 20, 22 years old. And when they discovered that here was a gringo who was going to be in the bullfight the next day, they were thrilled. So I sort of went into the bullfight with some fans. These guys said, "We're going to see you. We're going to watch you very closely, Jefe." My name is Jeff, but in Mexico you don't pronounce J's, you say. So they said, "We're going to be calling you. You'll hear us. We're in the stands." So look, I went to the fight the next day. Went through all the routine. Oh, the day before, we went in to see the bulls that we were going to be fighting as well in the pens. So to make this part of the story a little shorter, I went out and did a little cape work. They were allowing me to do that and were being very cautious. You stand behind a thing called a barrera, which is a large wooden thing, not too different from a wooden porch. And it's close enough to the wall so the bull can't get in there with the horns. And that's where you retreat to when things get a little too hot out in the open plaza. So they let me do a little bit of tape work, and of course my tape work was very clumsy. And I was allowed to put in the first pair of the banderillas. And it was more or less successful. I got it where it was supposed to be, in the top of the bull's neck. And was so thrilled with my success at that point that I went back out with a cape. Well, one of the things you do with a cape is to bring the bull to you, but then you also move the cape so that the bull goes away from you at the last moment. So it's sort of a movement like that, and the bull follows the move. Well, that went fine for one pass, and with the next one, the bull got me. Head over heels I went. And the crowd was enjoying this very much. The Mexican crowd with a gringo out there already getting gored. And I heard my friends calling from the stands, my Mexico City friends. "Oye, Jeff!" They were even saying Jeff right. "Get up, Jeff, get up." And the bull came at me again, and I grabbed his horns, and the bull lifted me off the ground with his horns. And there I was, and I have a couple of pictures of this. With me essentially bulldogging the bull, not really fighting Mexican style, trying to get the bull to fall down by turning his neck. And at about this point, I was rescued by Silverio, the guy who had trained me, who came out and put his cape over the bull's head and said, "Go, go, go," and I did. So that was my first bullfight. I was so thrilled that I had been in it and was convinced that I was becoming a Mexican. I had three other fights, and my name was even on the poster and things of that kind. I had three other fights, and without getting seriously injured, and this was just a little puncture wound here in my left leg that I got that first fight. And one of these fights, actually two of the fights, was out of town in other places. And it was sort of an ideal thing from a gringo who was trying to really fit in Mexico, because they were seeing this as kind of, motivation of an American to be friends, to be, supportive of Mexico. Uh, it was a great time, and a most unusual time for a guy who was only at that time 21 years old. Um, I lived there for 2 years and painted and studied with David Siqueiros. And then all of a sudden there was an argument between David Siqueiros and the director of the school, uh, who started calling us all communists because David Siqueiros was a communist. And the next thing you know, the American embassy had withdrawn the GI Bill approval to the school, because this was just the beginning of the crazy anti-communist sweep in this country. And so there we were, all hanging around, no GI Bill money coming in, and gradually we, one by one, went back to the States. And was the end of one phase of my life and the beginning of another one, because I went back to, not home to Georgia, but to New Orleans, to the French Quarter. And from that point on, for about 4 years, was a French Quarter artist, displaying my work on the street. Well, I was, when I came into the French Quarter, there were very, very few artists that were working down there. There were some fine arts, and there was an art school that some people were working at. But as far as street artists, guys who were out there selling their work to tourists and whatnot, Johnny Donnell's the guy who still has a place in the French Quarter, was there. And nobody else was hanging art in Pirates Alley, which is next to the cathedral, at all. Johnny had a place under the little arcade there. And when he met me at the Bourbon House, which everybody ate at and drank at in those days, he said, "Hey man, why don't you come on out to where I am and hang your stuff out on the fence?" So I did. So at that time, there were really two people who were showing art in Pirates Alley and out in where the tourists were. And of course, there weren't only tourists. There were two other people who did portraits, who had displays over at the gate to Jackson Square. And that's the way it was for about 2 or 3 years. One other person joined me, and we were just sitting there with the tourists coming by and saying, "Oh, look at that! Are you selling these? Or what's the story?" And there was a wonderful tour guide, guy probably some cracker from Middle Mississippi somewhere, who used to say, "And folks, this here is Parrots Alley. The parrots used to be here." That's the way he said pirates. "The parrots used to be here." And Bill Collins, who was the only other guy sitting out there at that time, would turn to the crowd and say, "And here's two parrots right now." The guy never batted an eye, never bothered him, never changed his spiel. And the tourists used to laugh a little, and some of them just looked very puzzled about what is this parrot and what are we talking about. I did that for about 3 years, and met some friends, and together we rented a place up in the country in Mississippi. And I got really interested in living out in the country at that time, and figured that sometime in the future, when I retire, I want to retire up there in the woods and on a river. And as a matter of fact, on the Bogachita River, because that's where our little place was rented. And that the way my life went. I continued to paint, made a living at painting, and um, went to the woods with these friends of mine. And on one day, we were sitting at the Bogachita River, actually bathing in it, weaving, and one of the guys had just come back from Mexico. And he said, "Man, I found this great place in Mexico. It's called Puerto Vallarta on the west coast." And told us about it, had some pictures he showed us. And we started making plans to go as a group back to Mexico. They weren't artists. One of them was an editor for the State's Item newspaper. The other was an advertising man, working for doing all kinds of television commercials. And sure enough, 6 months later, the whole crew of us went down to Puerto Vallarta. And it was my second trip to Mexico. At that time, it was just a tiny little fishing village. And I really miss it still. I dream about it sometimes. One of the things, I guess, that came from us having our place in the country, a place we rented on the Bogachita River, as I said before, is I always wanted to be able to return there. When I came back from Mexico, we started. I was married, my wife Nina, and we started looking for a place up in the woods and on the river, and finally did find some little place which we called Taproot. I don't know if you know what a taproot is, but it's the main root, and mostly pine trees. It goes way, way down into the earth, and it sustains the tree. It keeps it, even if a tree gets all broken up by storms and everything, as long as that taproot is there, the tree will stand up and come back and try to be and be a healthy tree. So that's what we named the place, was Taproot, because it was like sort of strengthening our soul. It was where we were. It sustained us, and I still have that place. As a matter of fact, I have retired to that place, and probably will die in that place someday. And here we are right now in that place. As a matter of fact, at Taproot, rather beat up by the hurricane. Well, there's a little time lapse in there. We've been at Taproot since 1969, and that's many years. And have slowly worked on the place and tried to get it into sort of a little Garden of Eden, I guess, a little park where we and our grandchildren and our friends could come out of the city of New Orleans and find some rest and peace. And so we did. I think we had the place where we were really enjoying it when word came that the big one, the hurricane, was coming to New Orleans. And my daughter came up and stayed with us. We figured Taproot, it's 75 miles, 80 miles from the coast. We're nice and safe up there. We'll just sort of hunker down and have a little generator, so if electricity goes out, we'll be safe. And so here we stayed with a monster storm, not stopping in New Orleans, not stopping in the Gulf Coast, but coming all the way up to Taproot and on into Mississippi. And around me right now are many trees that have crashed into the water, into the house, into everything else. And we're sort of not quite back to square one, but we're back at a place where we know it's vulnerable. It still sustains us. It's still Taproot. It's still that thing that goes way down deep to sustain our soul. But it's also a place that's going to take a lot of love and tender care to restore it. So we want to stay here for the rest of our lives. Taproot has been a very significant place for our family. Our children, grandchildren have spent a lot of time here. And over the years, as some of the relatives died, their ashes were scattered here at Taproot. One was my wife, Nina, whom I met in Mexico, and I was in Puerto Vallarta, and brought back home to the French Quarter, and then ultimately to Taproot. Um, she loved the place. For a woman who was very well educated and very hardworking in the city and the prison system, actually. She would come up here and pull vines out of trees and try to beautify the place, smiling and singing to herself for all day long, day after day when we came here in the summer and on the weekends. Um, so her ashes are now down at the old house at Taproot, along with the ashes of my father, of a nephew, of two or three other relatives. And so the roots are still there. And this is, I'm content to be here, even with all my dogs barking at me.
Uh,
And Fritz, so are you, I guess,
yeah.
because here you are. It's certainly what keeps me here and what makes me feel a little uneasy when I'm off in the city. I think, well, I really ought to be out there sitting by my lake or doing some work, pulling trees down, cutting wood up. Whoa! Or picking up battery packs. Yeah, one of the things that's been left out is those years between me meeting Nina in Puerto Vallarta and bringing her back to the French Quarter. Was that after about 5 years of painting and coming to the country on the weekends and sort of thinking about things, I decided that I wanted to be a psychologist. That the art thing was just not satisfying me enough, and I needed more intellectual stimulation. Well, our first baby was on the way, and Nina was very, very supportive of all this, and said, "Let's give it a try." So I applied to Tulane University, and thanks to her, learned how to write, learned how to study, learned how to really get my brain awake again after all of those years of being a feeling artist instead of a thinking kind of person. And really, I owe my success in that. I did actually get a PhD in psychology and worked at Tulane as a teacher for 30 years, retiring just a few years ago. And there's no doubt but what her support with the three children we had while I was an undergraduate, and her support with me in class after class after class over 8 years made it possible for us to do that. Um, about the only thing that identifies me in any way with Tulane right now, although I talk with friends every now and then, is that all the people around here who've been here for a long time know me as the professor. So out here in the country, the professor is like one of their neighbors, and paddling around in the same river and in the same woods that they all are. I don't think there's probably more than two people within 2 miles of here who went to college, and so the professor is about like, from their perspective, the alien or something. I suspect. Uh, I'm sure Nina gets a laugh out of it every now and then. Oh, as a matter of fact, most of those animals came from Christian, my stepson, who's in there. Two or three of them did anyway. He seemed to collect them there for a while when he was a youngster. And my wife after Nina died, my wife after Nina died is an animal saver and protector. Uh, this little fellow Wimpy, who keeps barking behind us, uh, showed up down at the river one morning when he was just a little puppy. So she brought him in. Chris found another dog at a filling station that had probably jumped out of a car and brought him home. So he's here. That's right. Oh, that's not. And who is that one? That's Annie, who's the one that Victoria rescued out on the highway. And so little orphan Annie came to live with us. And it just went on and on and on. It's hopefully stopped for a while because we've got more than we can take care of. But Taproot is a dog heaven as well as a people heaven, I guess.